Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Michelle Rosado and I work at the Connecticut State Department of Education in the Performance Office. I want to welcome you all to our webinar today about teaching social studies in a period of change. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. First of all, as I mentioned, thank you for attending and thank you to our presenters for graciously sharing their best practices with the rest of their colleagues from Connecticut. Just as a reminder, all attendees are in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. However, we welcome your questions. Please use the questions box or the chat feature to pose your questions to our presenters. Questions will be addressed by the presenters during the session. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and it will be posted to the CSDE's COVID-19 webpage. Today we have a special group of presenters that are going to be taking us through their journeys of virtual learning in social studies. Our first team is from Canton Public Schools. We have Jessica DeMaio and Nora Mocarski. From East Haven, we have Joe Marangell and Jennifer Murrihy, and from New Canaan we have Mary, Hanna, and Matt Salvestrini. Our first team is from New Canaan, so we've got Mary and Matt, and I'm just gonna put their slides up here. And okay, Mary and Matt, take it away.
Hi, welcome everyone. We are pleased to be here to share a little bit about our e-learning journey, and we hope that whether you're reflecting on this year or thinking ahead to whatever next fall looks like, that you'll find something with what all of us present that you can sort of hook your teeth into and to guide you in that. So I'm Mary Hanna. I'm the kindergarten through 8th grade social studies coordinator in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm here with my colleague, Matt Salvestrini, who's the director of digital learning.
Hi, everybody.
Let me just see if I can advance the slides here. Nope. Sorry. And we're on our next one. So when the group got together and were asked to do the webinar, we really tried to come up with some themes that we hope will resonate through the 3 presentations that you find today. And one theme that kept emerging was equity. How are our students getting equitable experience in their e-learning? And again, I think that also goes to teachers, right? Equity with teachers. Another one was social emotional, both learning and well-being. And then sort of that third component is preparing for it all. How do we make decisions about curriculum? How do we make decisions about professional learning to support what teachers are doing? So I may need help advancing the slides. Thank you. So just so you know a little bit about our district, we're in Southwest Connecticut. We've got 3 K-4 elementary schools, 1 grade 5, 8 middle school, and 1 high school. And just to round numbers for ease, there's about 500 students at each of our 3 elementary schools and 1,500 students at the middle school. As I mentioned before, I'm the kindergarten through 8th grade social studies coordinator. I am not in the classroom. I serve as a function of coordinating all the curriculum and assessment and instruction, as well as a coaching role. I do not have resource people or specialists in my department. I'm sort of the lone person. However, I do have a team of grade level point people at each grade level that function as sort of that collaboration team, and we can make decisions together about next moves in our curriculum. Our grade 5 is a transitional model, and we have grade 5 teachers teach math and social studies, which is a little bit unique, I think. And then 6-8, we've got 4 teachers at each grade level. So there's 20 teachers dedicated to teaching social studies at the middle school. Just gonna pass it over to Matt, and he can explain the structure and systems of his department.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you all for having me, giving me the chance to join you all this afternoon. As Mary mentioned, I'm the Director of Digital Learning in New Canaan. I've been in the role for 5 years. It's a unique position, and we have a team of 12 teachers made up of librarians and technology integrators. and they're responsible for the integration of technology in the instructional area, and it takes a little bit of different shape in each of the different levels. At the elementary level, we have one technology integrator and a librarian at each of our 3 schools, and they have a combination of both drop-off direct instruction and a little bit of flexible collaboration time. In the middle and the high school, they're fully flexible, and their main role is to collaborate with classroom teachers on the design and implementation of instruction, where they can leverage both technology and information in the process.
Great, thanks, Matt. Moving on to the next slide, I wanted just to share with you the overview of our district approach, and I'm sure each of your districts has its own goal. Our superintendent, Dr. Brian Lutzy, charged us with 3 overarching goals that we really consider as mandates. That the first one, that we are to engage all students in meaningful and relevant work so they continue learning and progressing. The second one, that we keep students connected to their teachers, peers, and schools, and that was vital. And then the third goal is to provide continuity and consistency for our students to help them remain healthy in all domains of their life. And on the next slide, I outlined the 3 different phases, and I'm sure all districts have some iteration of different phases that we've gone through. Not to go into too much detail here, but as you all, our phase 1 was really creating that temporary classroom. What could we do for 2 weeks? And then it became 4 weeks. And then we moved quickly into phase 2, building a sustainable system once we knew we were out for the duration. And then phase 3 really expanded that instruction, deepened the connections, layering on much more feedback on an ongoing basis. So on the next slide, I am just another way to show this with social studies. I think some of the things we did in phase 1 sort of carried over throughout these other phases, and then we kept layering on and really going deeper in our work. So we continued instruction of existing units. In some cases, we moved some units around that made more sense for at-home instruction. We developed very quickly on different ways of instructing, whether it was recording lessons or going on live for a class. And we really sought right away that equity to make sure we knew who our vulnerable students were, that we were in contact with every single student and family to maintain that, that connection, which obviously leads to that social emotional well-being. And that also meant being in contact with teachers, perhaps even more short meetings, just to make sure they were okay. As you all probably have, there are teachers here that are balancing homeschooling, teaching, and care for their own children under 5 without any childcare. So some of the equity and the social emotional piece really goes for our teachers as well. And as we moved into phase 2, it was really clear that we were out for the rest or most of the year, that we had to identify power standards. Things were just taking longer to accomplish, and which led to different kind of professional learning, different kind of support. We really had to look hard at what we're able to accomplish and what we could not accomplish. What could we measure in social studies, and what would remain as a question about whether the students actually owned that knowledge, understanding, or skill. And phase 3, which obviously is our current phase, we're really trying to, with laser-like precision, give feedback and really understand a little more about what our students can know, understand, and do, but really ensuring also that our teachers are balancing that asynchronous and synchronous instruction, that we're not relying on just assigning assignments, that we're actually instructing. And that really looks different. A kindergarten teacher may need more face time and group time with their students than someone in grade 8. So there's a recognition that it's going to look different at different grade levels. And on the next slide, I have just sort of nestled the different focuses that we have, starting with the Connecticut Social Studies framework. As we're looking at standards, we're choosing those power anchor standards. Some things we can do, some we can't. We're choosing, again, that content. And then we're nestling in that consistency. How do we make sure there's equity at grade level? If I'm a 5th grade teacher at the middle school, I really want to know what my 4th grade incoming students are going to know, understand, and be able to do. And part of this equity work has been point people that advocate and represent the families and classrooms at that grade level. And in some cases, we've been more prescriptive than ever about the lessons and goals that we want teachers to do, which is a little, not quite as much academic freedom as teachers may have had, but we're, committing to this together, collaboratively creating some lessons to make sure that our students have, the same experiences. And again, our focus is now that feedback to students and maintaining those connections with all students. So I'm going to let Matt speak a little bit to what the 3 phases have looked like for him being in that support role in the technology department.
Sure. Thanks,
On
Mary.
our next slide.
I'm going to there you go. So yeah, I think so our work really has to align with those phases that Mary had identified earlier. In the very beginning, it was, how do we set up that temporary classroom? And it was all about ensuring that the students have access to the technology. We are not one-to-one in K through 8. We have a cart-based platform. We are BYOD at the high school. So the first thing was to make sure that the students have the hardware that they need and the Wi-Fi that they needed. So we don't want to make any assumptions. We really had to make sure we got a really good sense of what students needed and able to access online learning. And then the next piece was really looking at our software. What's the software that we have and the licenses that we're already paying for, and how can we make sure that the teachers and the students have access to it from home? And then another, really from the very beginning, a key piece of that conversation was how are we going to communicate all of this information about these resources out to students, teachers, and parents? So we had an initial conversation about how do we put this online? How do we make sure that parents and families, teachers and students can go online and locate instructions very easily? At the very beginning, we had a baseline conversation with all the instructional leaders. How are we going to be communicating out the instruction and the lessons to students and families in a clear and consistent manner? As we moved into phase 2 with the realization that we're not coming back in 2 weeks, the conversation moved into how do we sustain it, okay? And do the licenses that we have for some software, are they sufficient? Do we need to go out and ask vendors for additional licenses? And in many cases we did, whether that's video conferencing with things like Zoom, video production tools. So they became a cornerstone for the instructional planning and delivery process. So we were very fortunate to get licenses for things like Screencastify and utilize licenses we have for WeVideo, etc. And that's where we started a system of offering weekly professional learning sessions focused on making sure that teachers have a good understanding of the technology we have available to them, offering really differentiated professional learning sessions, all optional, but short half-hour to 45-minute chunks where you can come and learn about how to manage some aspects of Google Classroom or how to create a Screencastify video. So teachers would be given a menu, and you'll see some examples a little bit later on. But to sustain the instruction, we had to make sure that teachers felt comfortable in using the tools. And the way we developed those professional learning sessions were with a conversation with instructional leaders like Mary and the assistant superintendent, and we did that on an ongoing basis. And just lastly, phase 3, it was a conversation about how is e-learning different than the type of instruction we would be delivering if we were in the classroom, and having conversations on synchronous versus asynchronous learning. How do we try to provide feedback for students, and how can we make sure that teachers are getting data from students and to ensure that they're making the progress they need?
Great, thanks, Matt. And yeah, I would agree that, you know, so many teachers have gotten used to different software and tools. So that's part of our next step conversation about what we can afford and what we can't in whatever the fall looks like. I thought I would just walk you through some of the dimensions. And, you know, part of our work has been K-5, and, you know, we have a fully articulated curriculum that, you know, embeds our social studies framework. So I thought I would just share some of what is happening in our district. With Dimension 1, developing questions and planning inquiry, we were fortunate that probably 4 or 5 grades from K-8 were already in a deep dive in inquiry. They already had some compelling research questions and were off and running. It was just a matter of either them taking some books home to finish that research and be supported in an online environment, or guided towards some other resources that would help them. However, some units just began when we were out, since we are out for a while. And I wanted to give you a snapshot of what that developing those questions and planning inquiry might have looked like. And I'm going to actually start on the right here. Mrs. Carrie Needle's class in 1st grade, they were studying South America, and to engage them early on in the inquiry, she used the See, Think, Wonder routine that you might be familiar with visible thinking. And she had picture prompts that she put up, and she had the kids go through that routine, which they were already familiar with, generating questions and sending them back to her. And an example of how they actually could use some of those questions up in 4th grade, I'm sharing here Danielle Murdoch's classroom, and she used to launch her inquiry into exploration past and present. She used a video of a cave explorer from today. Sometimes students don't think that there's exploration that goes on today. So she used that along with their compelling question of what are the intended and unintended consequences of exploration. So just to generate some chat and some dialogue about that, students were asked to come up with some supporting questions. And this is what we're calling a cork board in district, and it's nothing more than a Google slide presentation that looks like a cork board with some sticky notes. Students are shared that cork board, and they're able to write down their questions and share with classmates. That way, Danielle and other teachers can go through and help them sort questions and prioritize questions to continue that inquiry. So if we go on to the next slide, I thought I would jump to Dimension 2. And I don't have, there we go. Oh, one back, there we go. Dimension 2. And, you know, early on we heard from parents, especially at the elementary level, what can our students do that is not online? We understand that there's instruction and value being online, but what can they do offline? And, you know, I think this is especially in the wheelhouse of elementary teachers. We had some great ideas. So when we're thinking about geographic representation, we actually had a March mapping madness. You know, there was no basketball happening, so we jumped right in and filled that with mapping. And teachers and students alike could share maps that they found or that they created. And our kindergartners have learned to map their world. So you see on the top Jacob's map of his world, looks like his kitchen maybe. And then we have another map at the bottom that's far more detailed for an older student, but really connecting some of those disciplinary concepts and tools into our everyday life, help kids to really see the relevance. And then with exploration past and present, students are making timelines. There's no classroom for timeline. We didn't want just the teacher to do the timeline. So students were really looking for, I mean, I had a timeline up here, you can't see it, but we were all creating timelines or any way that we could in a floor or a wall, wherever, to show the understanding so students can have those richer discussions, not just of the representation, but what do they mean for change, continuity, and context. And if we go to the next slide, we've got Dimension 3, evaluating sources and using evidence. And now we're talking about elementary school. So some can read to learn, some cannot read to learn. And this really gets into the equity of it all, making sure that all of our students have access to that learning. And it could be a teacher coming on and recording something in Screencastify. On the upper left, we have a teacher who's, you can see the little light. She is directing her students through some of the geographic regions of Australia, and they're comparing that with some other things. We've had some very wildly popular field trips, and we've really tied them with curriculum. We've had more field trips than ever. It's great, no buses, don't have to line up the chaperones. All parents can participate. It's like a win-win. And you can see in the bottom left, we've got a 60 minutes field trip to the Capitol Dome. So I would say that our 5th graders studying US government have been more places than our 5th graders have ever been. They've been to, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, and people, our 1st graders studying South America have been to Machu Picchu and all sorts of places. So it's been wonderful. On the upper right-hand corner, you see Mrs. Needle. She found a parent who actually was born and raised in Brazil and came in and shared a book and all about her country. Students could then ask questions from this expert and learn about Brazil that way. And on the bottom right, you're going to see an interview. It's a Q&A with a 5th grade teacher who's actually a lawyer. And the students in 5th grade had many, many questions about the judicial branch and lawyers in particular. So we were able to pull those questions together and do a little bit of Q&A remote style, along with some web quests and some other things. So we go to the next slide. We've got our dimension 4. Oh, back one more. Oh, no, I think, Matt, this is your turn. I'm sorry.
That's
Let's
okay.
advance one more time. I apologize. We'll have you jump in here.
Well, just to support that evaluating sources and inquiry process, in order to be able to do that, they have to be able to have access to those sources. I mentioned before that, a part of my team are librarians. So they've done a tremendous amount of work in making sure that the resources that students might otherwise be able to access if they were to come down in a physical library are available online. And these are just 2 snapshots of some documents and resources that our middle school librarian assembled and put together to try to give teachers the guidance as to where they can go to get everything from databases to some of the sources that you have here. Working very hard to make sure they're aligned with what the social studies teachers are focusing on, and supporting their work. We're trying to make their work a little bit easier, and making sure they know exactly where they need to go to get it done.
Great, thank you. And our next slide, I think this is the area that we've had to have maybe the most compromise in, because it's often where our performance assessment is located. And how are we going to even assess kids when we know at some point it's been a collaborative effort at home? So we've really taken a broader view of this and allowed kids to really get back to, I think, some of the roots of communicating conclusions and taking informed action, and not as an assessment tool per se, but as a way of really helping students own what they've learned and understand and can do, and convey it in a way that makes sense for them. So you'll see on the left, kindergarten teacher Beverly Griffin, they were investigating Australia. I shared some work of hers before, and she invited all the students to make a tourism poster to promote Australia. So this is one student's tourism brochure to promote Australia. And we see the Sydney Opera House. I couldn't resist one. Of course, we see some koala bears on the Sydney Opera House, but it's when you look closer, it's a kindergartner's understanding of what's special about Australia and why you should go. It's like, yeah, Sydney Opera House, but I need the koalas. I got a chuckle out of that one. And then we have 3rd grade instructor Tori Merrick, who I'm just going to give a shout out. She is just, she is a substitute teacher for our district who's gone above and beyond. And her class, she took over before we went out into break, and she continues her hard work. The students were researching different regions in the United States, and here is a sample of a child who researched about the Southeast, and he decided to explain what he learned, but also to share a menu that might have happened in the Southeast. So again, he got a lot of choice, and her students really owned that. And on the next slide, I just wanted to share a couple of things for middle school. And I'm not sure why I'm going right to left, but so be it. We see Mr. Brett Gillen and his class, and what he did is they were already starting their inquiry before they left, and their question was, when does the present reflect the past? And they were researching different cultural hearths around the world, and he did something unique that I think blends some of the technology in sort of the management of it all. His students all presented their conclusions on a shared website, and then he used Zoom for the kids to focus in and look at each other's website in almost a museum kind of way, along with some feedback at the same time. And this is how he sort of organized his day. I thought that might be helpful for you to see how he had the different periods. He did the same thing for a dry run dress rehearsal, and really allowed students to say, I mean, I heard students say, well, I'm nervous to share about this and that in the Zoom environment. So able to really bolster the kids, be attentive to that social emotional well-being of kids in different formats. Zoom is not for everyone, and really be supportive to make sure that all students were able to share in the way they were able to. And then on the left is a snapshot of grade 8. Obviously work looks different at grade 8, and we're moving on. So Matt, you want to go on with professional learning?
Sure. You know, part of that preparedness is,
we've got a couple minutes left.
okay. Part of that preparedness is professional learning. These are just two snapshots of, you know, a professional learning matrix, one for the elementary level at the right, one for the middle school at the left, trying to differentiate that instruction, offer a variety for teachers to choose from, and really responding to the needs that we were hearing from the teachers, filtered up through their instructional leaders, and then up to the curriculum coordinators and right through to the assistant superintendent. And these are two very good examples of weekly plannings and weekly offerings that we would put out to teachers.
So our last slide, just, do you want to speak to?
I just going back to the social emotional, from a technology integrator standpoint, two things that came up, trying to stay connected with students, like Mary had mentioned. We needed to make sure we offered email so that teachers could reach out directly to students in the middle school. We did not have it on for all the way through 8th grade and above. We had it on, so 6th and 7th grade we turned it on, but there was some instruction and training we needed to offer there. And then to the right, we support that social emotional piece by offering a masked singer experience at the elementary level. On the right-hand side, you see the panel of judges, all teachers at one of our schools, and on the left is a masked student with a wig on and some sunglasses, and she's doing her performance, which was rated, just to you know, keep that engagement and that enthusiasm for the learning process.
Yeah, and I just, you know, conclude by saying that we also do work with Mark Brackett and Yale and the Ruler program, and that had already happened beforehand. So that was great. The teachers were able to bring in that mood meter and some of that work into their work. So that is it. I'm not sure if we have any questions, Michelle, that you'd like us to answer before we move on.
I think I'm going to pose one to you both as we're transitioning to our next group from East Haven. But what strategies have been successful in dealing with students who are not engaged in the curriculum?
That's a great question. We have sort of a chain of command policy. So teachers reach out themselves several times. If they're having struggle, they go right to their guidance counselor or their support staff, no matter what grade it is. And then that is usually followed up, again, copied everyone with the administrator. So we've got multiple adults and multiple eyes on every student to encourage that engagement. That's sort of the short answer for it. I think we've had pretty high engagement, that there's mostly outliers, but that was one of the first moves we made, was to identify those vulnerable students that may be vulnerable even when they're, because of chronic absenteeism or whatnot in the classroom, that we carried on and tried to get a hold of them first to make sure that they had what they needed.
Thank you both, Mary and Matt. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and Joe right now.
Thank you so much.
Unmute myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Murrihy. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction for East Haven Public Schools. And my esteemed colleague, I'll do a Brady Bunch here, to my right is Joe Marangell.
Hello, I'm Joe Marangell. I'm the Social Studies Instructional Leader for East Haven Public Schools.
So thank you for coming, and I believe Michelle gave me mouse control, so I'll make sure that works. I want to just preface everything we're about to say by saying that none of it would have been possible without an amazing leadership team. Our teachers who were willing to dive in and take risks and get excited about the work, as well as our building level administrators who have been extremely supportive in trying to find ways to schedule and develop routines, our instructional leadership team, of which Joe is a part, and most importantly, I think our superintendent and our director of pupil services, Erica Forty and Bob Swan, have had so many thoughtful conversations with us about this equity lens. So you'll see that woven through here. And so I'm really proud of the work of our team and our families as well, who've provided us with feedback and insight into what's working and not working so that we can continuously improve. And so that grounds a lot of the work that we do. But I'll go ahead and see, can I get this going? Let's see, Michelle, I might need some help here. Back one. So let me tell you, yeah, can you go back one, Michelle? This is our district, and this is, we are a mid-size urban periphery district. So we have about 3,000 students. We're on the outskirts of New Haven. 4% of our students are Asian. We have 4.7% Black and African American, and then a 28.7% Hispanic Latinx. With 2.6 of our students are multiracial and with 59.8% white. We have 15% or so as identified as having disabilities. And we do work really hard to develop strategies and programs for our students with English learner status. We've developed some sheltered courses over the course of the year. And so that's been a very exciting opportunity to get to connect with some of those learners and families. We have 4 elementary school, which doesn't include our 1 through 8 magnet school. It's an intra-district magnet school, which brings in kids from all over East Haven. We have 1 middle school and 1 high school. We are an alliance district, which affords us some opportunities to innovate and get creative about meeting the needs of some of our neediest learners. All right, next slide. Okay, oops. So one of the things that we did in terms of preparing for distance learning is we really convened teams to look at the CSDE guidance, which was very helpful. We found that we were given lots of opportunities to connect, and we thought about our mission and vision and what meant the most to us. And I thought we really captured a lot of input from families and feedback. We did surveys in English and Spanish to capture people's level of readiness for learning, including internet. And we knew in such a challenging environment, we want to make sure we did 3 things. One was promote equity as much as possible, knowing that we could not account for the varying degrees of the home situations of our students. We also wanted to incentivize engagement as much as possible. So what could we do? What decisions could we make that would make it more likely for students to engage? And then we also considered the fact that students were grieving their loss of a connection, of a home, of a school day and a routine. So we wanted to provide the most opportunity for students to connect with their peers and meet their social emotional needs, as well as the important academic habits, such as reading, writing, thinking about and talking about content. And we wanted to think about any policies or decisions that would have unintended consequences of negatively impacting this. And so we really thought about that very purposefully to develop a framework that involved a schedule, which I don't know that we're going to go over the schedule, but it is shared on a later slide with you, involving 2 live sessions per week per class. So we knew at the very bare minimum, kids could know when to access their teachers for 3 days a week of virtual office hours and 2 days a week of some kind of live discussion. And Joe's going to talk a little bit more about that. So our timeline in East Haven, included a March on March 10th, we started thinking about this kind of really, really carefully. We began to plan for some cancellation. And it was March 12th when school closures were announced. We had some guidance at that time from the commissioner that required supplemental learning. So our family engagement team, which includes Julie Church, we were on the phone, we were working with families, we were trying to get to what would be helpful for them. We worked with our coaches at the elementary level and our instructional leadership team and departments at the upper levels to determine what we could do for a 10-day, sort of a couple of weeks to get through supplemental learning. And so those were ready to go. We had paper packets available online and printed at our meal delivery sites on the first day of closure, which I believe was March 16th. And we immediately thought about ways we could incorporate more families. So we got permission from vendors to do things like post lessons on our local public access channel. And we developed a distance learning hub, professional development website for folks because we were able to afford our teachers the opportunity to have, before the 2 days of synchronous professional learning, we had 3 days of an opportunity for teachers to do asynchronous, sort of developing their own skills based on their needs. And so that was part of maybe an important part of that website, that distance learning hub that we created. And again, to Matt's point, we had to procure data privacy contracts and additional online licenses because we wanted to be sure that we were protecting student data wherever possible. And so we were fortunate that we had already partnered with many of our vendors, especially in the social studies, to support the ongoing work of that. And we also had really clear conversations about our neediest students that would support what they would need in terms of accommodations, and got our paras up and running to be able to do some academic support in classrooms. Okay. Did I skip one, Joe? Okay. So in addition, the 3 days of asynchronous professional learning, the 2 days of synchronous professional learning required all teachers at every school to engage in tech integration, differentiated tech integration sessions where they could kind of self-select based on their needs. Our pupil services staff did a wonderful job presenting on how to meet the needs of special populations in a distance learning environment. So our social studies teachers particularly got some good ideas and tools. One of the concerns in a social studies classroom is that when you're doing online assessments and things, is the only way our students are going to demonstrate their learning by writing about it and reading about it. We wanted opportunities for oral language, which we know can sort of help kids learn and help their brains congeal information. We also had some building-based departmental collaborations, which kind of stuck with us. I think a team huddle, we call it, became a good way to just check in. We built some space in the morning in our schedule to make sure that our teachers could kind of just connect with each other and just say, hey, the kind of that water cooler talk that we value when we're in the building. And then again, ongoing personalized PD based on need, which I'm always constantly, my team and I and Joe and his team are always adding to the screencasts that go out. Just today, we put it out in a Google Classroom, some information about going live. And so it's nice that we already had those frameworks in place so we can kind of push some things out now that we're in a distance learning environments, which was again a testament to the leadership team that has already kind of been working together so long. Okay, so Joe, your show.
Okay, actually, can you go back one slide to synchronous?
One slide, sure.
Okay, perfect. Oh, go up one. There we go. Okay, so as Jen mentioned, one of our district's priorities has been to promote equity with the knowledge that our students are coming from a variety of experiences. So with that in mind, East Haven developed a schedule that would allow for both synchronous and asynchronous learning to happen throughout the week. So first we realized that not all students would be able to attend school during the regularly scheduled times. For example, at the secondary level, in particular, we have some students who are looking after younger siblings, and we knew it would be difficult from a district perspective to mandate that they all be logged into their classes at set times throughout the day. However, we did want to provide a structure that would allow for live learning for students who do learn best through the real-time interactions that they have with other students and teachers. So one part of our distance learning model includes that teachers hold live sessions a minimum of 2 times per week. So these sessions are scheduled during set times that reflect an abbreviated version of our bell schedule, which we do have posted at the end of the presentation, and I think it's available in the handouts if people are interested. But basically, first period every day always meets from 9:30 to 10 o'clock, and second period always meets from 10 o'clock to 10:30. And the point of that is that we wanted to be sure that teachers weren't scheduling sessions that would overlap for common groups of students. So this slide that you see here shows some ways that social studies teachers in particular are providing synchronous learning opportunities. The first type of opportunity would be a virtual class. And by that, I mean that all students would log in at a designated time and then have an opportunity to explore the content together and replicate the types of discussions that might happen in an actual face-to-face class. So if teachers are offering those types of sessions, we encourage them to record them so that students who aren't able to access them can get to them at a later time. The second type of session is a virtual office hours type of opportunity. And those are opportunities for students to meet one-on-one with teachers to get help with their assignments. So some teachers publish blocks of times that they're available throughout the day, and they'll allow students to drop into their sessions when it's convenient for the students during those blocks. And other teachers ask that students make appointments for individual learning, meetings during those times. But we try to have a mix of both of those types of sessions so that students have the class community element and then also the one-on-one conferencing with their teachers. And we find that synchronous sessions are important because they allow students to maintain the classroom community that students are missing from learning at home. And interestingly, just in talking with a lot of different students about their experiences with these sessions over the past several weeks, they are reporting that they're finding them helpful, but at the same time, it's awkward for them because it's a new style of learning. So we're definitely trying to find ways to increase engagement in those sessions and to provide clear structures for students so that they do become comfortable in learning in a different type of way. Jen, can you go to the next slide on asynchronous? Thanks. So our model also incorporates asynchronous learning opportunities for our students. Yes.
Let's see.
Oh, go back one. Both of those look similar. So
I
one.
see.
Forward. There we go. Yeah.
Or which one?
That's the one. Okay. So our model also incorporates asynchronous learning opportunities. We're a Google district, so we use Google Classroom as a platform for organizing all of our online content in each class. When we first started distance learning, we were asking teachers to post some sort of learning activity, informative assessment on Google Classroom each day. And that was mainly done to help students get used to the routine of learning online. But we've adjusted that model as the weeks have progressed. And now we're asking that teachers post 2 to 3 activities each week with the understanding that it might take students more than one day to work through a given lesson. We don't have a standardized format for online lessons, but we do recommend that teachers do share a daily learning target with students and consider how they're communicating that target, how they're offering opportunities for collaboration among students, and also how they are using formative assessments throughout the week to adjust their instruction, just like they would in their classrooms. From a social studies perspective, I find that asynchronous learning is a perfect platform for discussion-based activities. So for example, a teacher might present a guiding question on a Monday, then they'll allow students to examine some texts on Tuesday and Wednesday. Then students might post their initial thoughts to a discussion board on Thursday and then reply to some classmates on Friday. So what's great about that is that from an equity standpoint, every student's voice can be heard, and particularly students who might be hesitant to speak up in a live discussion have a platform to voice their ideas. Also, when students are participating in these types of discussions, they're able to log in at times that are convenient for them. So even though teachers establish deadlines for the activities, students are able to work at their own pace. Okay, can you go to the next slide?
Sure, and I'll just add one thing, Joe. I know New Canaan did a really nice job talking a lot about the layers of the frameworks. We kind of met to go into detail, but our curriculum is heavily based on the Connecticut frameworks for social studies. But we are each taking a little bit of a different lens. If you want to know more about our inquiry alignment in our curriculum, please reach out to either of us via email.
Definitely. So that leads to our next goal, actually, which deals with prioritizing the curriculum in order to maximize student engagement and to reflect those inquiry types of activities that we are doing in the classroom as well. And we like to say that, for us, figuring out how to do this has really become our own inquiry activity, because we're trying to find the best ways to address the curriculum, yet still maintain flexibility and demonstrate empathy for our different student situations. So with that in mind, we really focused on 3 considerations for prioritizing the curriculum. First, we needed to determine the critical content and the themes that for each course that we would address for the remainder of the year. So as the instructional leader, I met with different teachers, and we simply made a list of topics that best exemplify the concepts in the curriculum, remembering that depth at this point would be more important than breadth. Similarly, we considered skills that students had already learned in their courses up to that point and listed those, and thought about which ones would be helpful to reinforce throughout the distance learning experience. Not surprisingly, skills related to argumentation were at the top of that list. And it was really with those ideas in mind that teachers organized their learning experiences to address the elements of the curriculum that we chose to focus on. What's nice about our live learning schedule also is that it includes 4 hours of synchronous sessions each day. So teachers do have a good amount of time to plan these types of activities and to adjust the curriculum, and also to collaborate with one another in developing them. We've tried to provide teachers with a lot of support for their own professional learning. So we offer, like I mentioned earlier, we offer regular team huddles that we have in the mornings, either at the building level or at the department level. And sometimes we even have grade level huddles where we'll meet with individual groups of teachers about what they're planning for their classes. And we're also using asynchronous types of learning activities with teachers through Google Classroom, where we have departmental groups set up where we can post different ideas and allow people to comment on those there.
And from a parent and a family perspective, I think that's been appreciated. I think although our high school 6 through 12 and middle school schedules start much earlier than 9 o'clock in the morning, we definitely received feedback that there was a thought that teenagers wouldn't necessarily wake up to get online at that early time. So we allowed us some flexibility for the professional development.
Yeah, we basically took a 2-hour delay schedule. So our learning day starts at 9:30 for the high school, well, for both the middle school and the high school, but typically on a regular school day, it would start at 7:30. So that those 2 hours in the morning are often used for professional development. So this slide shows some ways that teachers have attempted to prioritize the curriculum to focus on critical content and skills. So in the first example, students are completing a week-long inquiry activity on the fairness of the Treaty of Versailles, and that would conclude their study of World War I. So as you can see, the schedule was developed in a flexible format, and students had multiple days to complete some of the activities. So in this case, the students began the week by exploring the inquiry question and then reading some text to build background knowledge. And then as on say Wednesday and Thursday, they then analyzed some primary sources by collaboratively annotating documents that the teacher posted. And then finally, by Friday, students were able to generate their own claims and substantiate them using the text that they explored during the week. So our focus in this case was for students to think about a historical issue, grapple with some text, and then communicate an argument. And those are all practices that students were familiar with from class activities during the year. It was just new content that was introduced at that point. In the second example that you see, the teacher there was focusing on students' research skills in this particular week. So on Monday, for example, the teacher hosted a live session and allowed students to select topics and develop research questions. And then Tuesday through Thursday were research days, but the teacher provided students with individualized support through written check-ins and virtual office hours. And then finally on Friday, students submitted their projects, and then they were able to view and comment on their classmates' projects. So again, here the teacher was reinforcing skills that students had already worked on throughout the year, but providing an opportunity for students to explore new content in the course.
Thank you.
Move to the next slide. These are just 2 screenshots of collaborative types of activities that we might see. The first one's a discussion type of activity where the teacher posted some text for students to look at, and then that they had a platform to post their initial comments and then reply to their classmates. This particular platform actually even allows students' names to be anonymous. It gives them pseudonyms of historical names. So teachers can set it so students don't even know who they're replying to. It's just about looking at the ideas and responding to those. The second one here is a spreadsheet that students filled out as they were reviewing their classmates' projects and just giving some feedback to the student as to what they learned, something that surprised them, something that they liked about the slide presentation. Again, just so that the collaboration could still happen and the classroom community would still be intact with an online environment. Okay, the next slide. Yeah.
So yes, go ahead, John.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks. So I'm sure like all districts, we've spent a considerable amount of time in East Haven trying to find the most equitable way to assess students, given the fact that we're addressing the curriculum in a very different way. And our students might be experiencing hardships that are preventing them from accessing their education in the same way that they did before the situation. So based on the guidance that districts received from the commissioner, we are offering several flexibilities to students in terms of grading. We're continuing to provide students with traditional grades. However, we did add some options that aren't usually available to students in a typical course. So first, any student can elect to have a final grade that's within the passing range reported as a P for pass on their transcript in place of the letter grade that they earned at the end of the year. And also, if students end a course with outstanding assignments that are still due, they're able to request that the teacher assign a final grade of incomplete. And in that case, the student would have until August 7th to work on those missing assignments and ultimately earn a higher grade in the course. We're also offering an online summer academy for students in grades K through 12. And through that, students will have the opportunity to recover credit in courses that they might not have passed, or they can also attend an academic workshop to receive support in completing assignments that they might need to do in courses in which they earned incomplete. We're also planning on offering some enrichment courses for students, and for high school students, they'll be able to earn additional credit toward graduation by completing them. Finally, our distance learning grades have been reported under its own marking period in our grading program. So that allows us to clearly delineate which grades were earned in school and which ones were earned online. And ultimately, as long as students are engaging regularly in distance learning, they will be able to maintain or raise the final grades that they had in their courses prior to distance learning starting. Throughout the past several weeks, we've made an extensive effort to communicate all of these policies with both staff and students and families. Jen has a webpage that's on the district website that includes all the documentation that's been sent out to both staff and families, and also includes a screencast that explains all these policies in detail. And because we do have a large Spanish-speaking population, all of our communication has been in both English and in Spanish.
And I think from a social studies perspective, when we communicate with families and we allow for that civic discourse to happen, to take into consideration the parent feedback and the thoughtful planning process from our teachers, it just sort of models that whole communicating conclusions. And we had an inquiry, right? How are we going to manage this inequity that exists within an individual child's home experience? And so, and as I'm talking to our social studies teachers and we're looking at it through the lens of the inquiry framework, we really did a little mini civics experiment on how do we mitigate some of these factors. And so that was really one of the things that I was extremely proud of our team. And again, the communicating and to make sure all of this is transparent, and the incentivizing kids to be able to demonstrate their thinking online as well as in written formats. It was really important. Okay.
So yep, that's it, right? Yeah, our final priority as a district was to address students' social and emotional needs throughout the distance learning experience. So I'll share some examples of how we've handled that at the secondary level, and Jen will also share some of our district-wide efforts in that area. So first, we have an advisory program at our middle and high schools. And although students aren't meeting with their advisory teachers right now, we do have grade level Google Classrooms where the advisory facilitators are able to regularly post wellness related activities for our students. So they're regularly posting tips for mindfulness, time management, even videos for exercising at home. And students are accessing those and finding it a nice non-academic piece to their day to look at. In an academic sense, we found very soon after implementing distance learning that students were feeling quite overwhelmed with the amount of work that they were being assigned in each class. So we have tried to institute some measures to address that with our students. So for example, at the high school, we have flex learning days now on Wednesdays, and on those days, no new work is assigned in any class, and teachers are available for one-on-one support with students. At our middle school level, we have a team structure, so we've been encouraging the grade level teams or the interdisciplinary teams to work together to create similar types of supports for the students that they have in common at that level. Our support service staff and our administration are also in regular contact with students and families when we are seeing that students are not fully engaging in distance learning. So we're using a special attendance code that teachers enter for students on Mondays based on their participation during the previous week as a way to track engagement. So it's not recorded as an absence, but we found that the attendance platform was actually the easiest way to track that data. So each Monday when teachers enter those codes for the students, the administration is able to run a report of students who might not have been fully engaging the previous week and then create an action plan for following up with those individual students with administration and support staff. And then finally, we're trying to find as many ways as possible to help students maintain a sense of school spirit throughout this shutdown. So for example, we've recently had a spirit week at the high school during which students and staff members were able to complete different activities every day. And then they were encouraged to post them to social media. We're also holding virtual academic award ceremonies and other end of year events that typically would happen in person. So we're really just trying to provide as much normalcy for our students during a time that's really anything but normal for them. Oh, sorry.
No, I would just add to also from a social studies perspective, thinking about the way that so many adults need to make decisions now from a lens of, you know, the Constitution and freedom versus we're having an opportunity with our kids and in our classrooms to help foster this, you know, discourse where people disagree, helping our youngest ones. And again, we focused on 612, but in our younger students' classrooms, how do we, you know, balance our want to go have fun with the need for the common good? These are really important conversations in our country that I think our social studies educators, this lends itself nicely to creating small bite-sized conversations that you can begin to look at articles and features and things from a different lens. And it's been a really important component of the work that our teachers are doing to foster conversation and dialogue in these synchronous and asynchronous ways. So I wanted to just add that. Okay, let's see. Michelle, am I done? Oh, no, okay. So again, when we thought about planning, we think about, you know, the way you roll out any new initiative, you need the stuff. We needed to make sure we had the resources. So we were fortunate to have had our students in 612 had one-to-one devices. We had to deploy additional devices in K-2. We were a one-to-one district in grades 3 through 12. And we had to get those computers in kids' hands at the elementary level because they didn't necessarily take them home back and forth. We wanted to make sure we had structures to build our team. So resources are also our people, our professional capital. So we provided many ways to build the resources of our students and our families, because our families are also a resource that we rely on to support our ongoing functioning and our students' well-being. So we provided them with many trainings and our teachers as well. And we wanted to get lots of a deep understanding of our special populations, our parents, our students in crisis, our families who may have essential workers in the home. So we did a number of survey data collection options. And that was a really important part of the success, I think, of our work, to kind of really understand. There would be a comment in a survey of something I would have never thought about. And just listening to that voice was really something that informed our decisions. I just wanted to kind of capture that a little bit in a little screenshot of some of the decision making that we did. Let's see. Okay, so one back. In conclusion,
Going
I'm
forward.
sorry. So there are silver linings. It is not necessarily within the scope of our control to change the global pandemic or to be able to make healthcare decisions. That's not the function of a school district. But we knew we had this difficult and challenging time, and we wanted to make sure we were able to help our families and our community focus on, given the circumstances, kind of make lemons out of lemonade. What can we gain? And this is coming from some parents who reached out to the office in some of these surveys. Parents found that their kids were improving in their self-advocacy skills. They were deepening our teachers deepened their technology integration pretty quickly, those that were less inclined to do so. Definitely perseverance from both families and teachers and students. I definitely had a couple of families report to me that, oh, I taught my kid this strategy. We're reaching out to try to provide some insight on study habits and things for those kids that are reaching out. Because they're beginning to get knowledge of themselves as learners. Oh, gee, I'm not someone who, I'm waking up and I'm staying up late, and what do I do about that? And these are opening up for those conversations allows kids to really reflect on themselves. And so that's part of the success that we've had, involves the equity of voice of the community to be able to plan in our best light. Okay, and so hopefully this will work. If you need to reach out to either of us, please do not hesitate to do so. If it went really well, I give Joe all the credit. He and his team in our social studies department were instrumental in making this work, and all of the members of our team and our families and communities and students. So thanks, East Haven.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe and Jennifer. Before we transition to Canton, let me just give you, I had a question. A couple people were wondering what program you use for the collaborative annotations of the primary source.
I've seen teachers use Google Docs and just have students put comments in them. And I also have seen, which I thought was very cool because I had never even heard of it up until a couple of weeks ago, Google Jamboard, which is kind of like an interactive whiteboard where a teacher can post a document or an image. I saw it with a propaganda poster that the teacher put on there, and students can put sticky notes to collaboratively annotate. So those are the two main ones that I've seen from my perspective.
And at the elementary level, some of our students are using Padlet or Flipgrid. There's a number of them out there, but they're interactive data model, or even just a simple see, think, wonder that, like Mary had mentioned, putting the document in kind of a screenshot of the document in a Google Doc, and then having that see, think, wonder framework depending on the age of the students. But that's an awesome question. Thank you.
That's actually going off of that. I saw this week a document that students read, just a short text, and there was like a quick text protocol that students filled out. So everyone in the class had access to the document, and students put their individual thoughts as they were reading it. So they weren't building off of each other's thoughts necessarily, but they were able to see what other people were thinking as they were reading it. So that's also definitely a great idea.
Great, thank you both. I'm going to turn it over to Nora and Jessica right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm mindful of the time. I realize that we want to leave some time for questions at the end of the session. I'd like to introduce my esteemed Jessica DeMaio. She's with me here from Canton. She teaches both 7th and 8th grade, and she's going to share with you some of the issues and social emotional concerns we've had and the way we've tackled some of that. And we'll talk about some ways in which we've dealt with inquiry and dealing with some priority standards in the whole process. Just to give you a brief heads up, I just wanted to say thanks to the New Canaan group, Mary and Matt. That was really good insight to what's happening in the elementary levels. And then Joe and Jen, that was really good insight. Joe, you'd mentioned that we're in our own inquiry, and I think that's very valid. So today what we're going to present is a little bit of what we're doing in the middle school and in the high school in terms of the social studies. And going last does give me an advantage to see who's with us as attendees. And I just want to give a little shout out to Lori and Jessica from Region 6 and Pete from Region 1, as well as Pat from Torrington. It's really nice to see people. And if I haven't seen others, welcome everyone. So Canton, just to give you a brief background on who we are, let's advance the slide. Generally, we're a suburban school right outside Hartford. We're generally small, so it's really good to get New Canaan and East Hartford here. We're Derg C, just to give you a sense. We've only got 4 schools, 1 high school, 1 middle school, and then 2 generally K through 8 schools, or sorry, K through 6. A total of 1,500 kids. And I put out here our scores in just general sense of where you can see where we are as a performance school in general. We can click that on if that's, am I in control of the slides? I guess I am. Well, I don't know how to advance them. Can somebody advance that? Thanks. So the 4 targets we had for today was talking about equity, social, emotional, prioritization, and the inquiry piece. So we'll go through these pieces pretty quickly, but we'd like to slow down a little bit on what we're doing with inquiry. So we'll advance the next slide. As you can see, one of the casualties, unintended and unexpected, is that you can't go to the doctors anymore. So I do need to put on second glasses so I can see things. Our district has moved through 3 phases as a whole. Tier 1, just to get introduced to our kids again, since we've had some snow days when COVID came along, we call them snow days. So we have in that process ongoing PD when we reintroduce ourselves to kids, setting up those class norms. We're in the middle of Tier 2 right now, really trying to figure out assessment. How well do we know our kids are really internalizing what we want them to know with our objectives? We've also launched PPTs, and through the hard work of our special ed department and our counseling department, we've managed to work through that, delivering services to those kids electronically. We're going to move into Tier 3 as a community, eventually working on NEAS, because that was already on the docket before COVID. So we're going to eventually visit soon that school-wide goal once we get our feet landed on Tier 2. So why don't we go to the next slide? So equity, that's probably what every district is dealing with, and it's exposing a big digital divide, and it might become a new deal when all of this is said and done. But we are very mindful of the FERPA. We were very mindful that certain pieces and tools that teachers all started to get excited to use may not be approved, but the state did allow a verbal commitment. And so that is a list here that I have here at Connecticut Learn Platform. For those of you that don't know, it does list those technologies that have promised to be in compliance with FERPA during COVID, so you might want to visit that. We do have an internal system, whereas if I wanted to approve some sort of piece of software, I can go into an internal request software form that our system set up in Canton for approval, just to make sure we're covering our bases. We've had generally no issues or minimal issues trying to get our kids hooked onto equipment, to Wi-Fi at home. We did a survey before moving out into full 100% use online, and we found most of our community has access. So we've had a hard department, the IT department, working really hard, pushing out processes so that if kids needed equipment, something broke, they can find ways to get new equipment out. And we have a drop-off pickup system. And we surveyed our parents as other districts have. And the fortunate thing about Canton is we've been a Google school for about 3 years now, I want to say. So what we have to do is try to balance our sync and async blended. And we also moved with traditional grades, not pass fail. But the bigger issue is time. We're generally losing time in our curriculum. Our curriculum is moving slower than we expected. So our bigger concern is equity. What will our kids graduate with? What will our kids move on to with the next grade with? So we're going to have to make some patches when we start school in the fall to try to make up for those gaps as we move on. So we'll hit the next slide. And Jess, why don't you take on some things that we've been doing to try to help kids socially, emotionally?
Sure. Thanks for letting me be here, Nora. As Nora said, I'm a 7th and 8th grade teacher. So really talking about what's happening day to day in the actual classroom. The other districts did a great job talking about social emotional. I think the question we're trying to answer really is, how do we keep kids engaged in an academic sense, but also engage in all the things that they do outside of the academics? So in terms of teachers, as Nora said, we had a gradual opening of just reestablishing class norms and what online expectations look like. As New Canaan said, kind of establishing that temporary classroom and what this is going to look like. And East Haven mentioned that they have advisory groups. We also have these groups at the middle school and high school level as well. We are meeting once a week with those groups at the middle school level, purely just for a check-in purpose. We often play games or do competitions, against different advisories just to keep them engaged with their peers. More of on a school level, we've also had Spirit Week. I co-advise the student council in the middle school. So we've been involved in organizing Spirit Weeks and different challenges to keep the kids engaged on a weekly basis. We've also had different car parades where teachers can volunteer to, drive through the neighborhoods and actually physically see our kids, and that's been really successful as well. On the middle school level, we also have the days that Joe was mentioning, that we call them flex days, where no new learning is being taught, and it kind of gives kids a break to just catch up or check in with teachers. We also have been planning school-wide community days where we have specific non-academic assignments for kids. So they're either getting out into the community in a service-based way, or connecting with each other, or doing some type of school-wide challenge. I think that last bullet there under student collaboration is kind of where we are now as a school. So trying to get kids to collaborate in an academic sense. We've kind of had this established, like we're meeting with our advisory groups, kids are engaged in these different ways, but how are we getting students to now collaborate through academic work? And personally, as a teacher, I've found that kind of what, East Haven was saying through these Google Docs, through things like Padlet and Flipgrid. I've had virtual gallery walks where there's a hyperdoc and, students' work is linked anonymously, and they're going in and commenting on each other's, and just a way for them to see, like, hey, this is what my classmates are doing. And I'm still learning from my classmates, even when we're not physically in the same space.
Thanks, Jessica. That was great. Why don't we go to the next slide? I think we've got a little bit less than 5 minutes to cover what we're doing in terms of standards and our curriculum. I'll just do a brief overview to what we used to do, and then Jessica kind of walk through the process of a DBQ. We used to do a full blown out Model UN where our entire 7th grade class would go off campus, and then the students would become countries and they would debate global issues, whether it was migration or water, access to water, and this sort of thing. So we scratched that because of COVID. So what we've had to do is look at what we already are involved with, and we typically do common DBQs. So one of the things that we've done is, worked with that existing DBQ. And Jesse, you want to take a little bit into what we've done?
Yeah, sure. So as Nora said, like taking this whole analyzing and evaluating sources and then having students come up with a conclusion without us being personally there. We've really taken this into an online model in terms of students are still getting that inquiry, like the brainstorm. I use Padlet a lot to have students be able to kind of like that corkboard model of like, what are your general ideas about this? And then I'm kind of following up with screencastifies and my analyzation of my analysis of sources to be a check-in for them. So we've been able to put this online. We have done discussion groups in small groups with students to be able to kind of analyze the sources and have that, what would happen as a debate inside the classroom, now in an online model. And I think even on the next slide, Nora, we've asked students to kind of go out into the world and answer their own questions that they're coming up with. So we're looking at the issue of migration, and is building a fence along the US-Mexico border a good solution? And so we actually are asking students to go out and find their own sources and then come up with a conclusion, that dimension 4 of like, how are we taking this out into the world and taking a stance now? So, with a couple modifications to how we would have done that in the classroom, kids are still analyzing sources and, debating each other just through an online model.
The reality is there are some big losers. I listed some parts of, and it's really the dimension 4, the communication and informed action. It would have been great to be off campus again and getting kids standing up and speaking on their feet. It's just one of those things with COVID. It's just a difficult situation. But of course, it's what makes social studies important and keeps us relevant. So moving forward, post-COVID, I think they're going to appreciate, well, number one, teaching and teachers, but also particularly social studies teachers. I just pushed in this last piece. I think one of the key kickers with success, student success, is to anticipate. That is to try to figure out where kids might have hangups, where they might struggle. And that's part of that preventative, we used to call it preventative officiating in volleyball, but it's the same kind of concept. So you kind of build your gaps with screencastifies, pushing in those minis on concepts that they may not get. So that way they can continue on and push towards the final product, the DBQ. And then of course, working with your special ed teachers are absolutely critical. And sometimes having those smaller meets with kids along the way before your product is due is going to be part of that essential process as inquiry is critical to keep it alive and keep it real. The last slide I want to do, because we've got to do some questions, is generally, as all the districts have been doing, is professional development along the way. As a district, while we're in the middle of Tier 2, RPD has moved from routines. What routines can we have? Yes, we're synchronous and asynchronous, which means we have a schedule and we don't step on teachers' toes. Like Tuesdays and Thursdays from 12 to 1, social studies meets. So that we set up with routines, and then now we're looking at teaching and learning. We're really looking at, do we get from the kids what we really intend, the depth of knowledge, the depth of understanding, and that's really like we're phase 2 and 3. John Bishop, he's a guy that's been working with us K through 12 with technology, and he pushed out a doc that hopefully y'all can get a link to here. It's our, internal district phase in terms of getting kids through phases 1 to 3 for learning. And I just listed a bunch of just tools that we've used, and we have a district resource for that learning, and that's a critical document for us as a district moving forward. So that's all we have to share for us as Canton, and we do appreciate you being here. And Jessica, again, thank you for being here. It's an awesome job.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it.
Great, thank you, Jennifer and Nora. I have a question for you guys. What program did you use for the online discussions and debates?
We're using Google Meets as a district. We actually use the nickname protocol to get into Google Meets. So in other words, that's protected when students have a code. So it's like my name that they enter into Google Meets. So that way, if the teacher is the last person to log out, the students cannot get in or stay in without you being in there. So we use Google Meets for all of our office hours and lab discussions like that.
Great question.
I think this question would be for probably everyone, maybe to kind of address, but do you have any projections about how many students will most likely need to have incompletes, and are teachers willing to grade throughout the summer? So I don't know.
I have to tell you, our guidance department is doing a great job. I don't think we're going to have many at Canton anyway, because we set up a system where once a week at the end of the week, every week, if you have a concern of a student, you send that through a Google form, and guidance captures it on Monday, and guidance is after the student and the family all week long to catch that kid up. So if say it's Johnny and I send one in, the following week, Johnny has shown some progress, but if Johnny's still a concern, I send it again. So every week it's this check-in piece that funnels out to psychologists, social workers, and guidance to get the kids to return that information to us, to get paper in.
And from the question about grading, I think it's important. So we have identified a timeline in East Haven. If you are a student who elects to end your year as an incomplete, you have to either demonstrate completion or progress by June 22nd, which is the date when our summer school program begins, or you have to enroll in what we're calling academic workshop in summer school. And our summer school right now is a distance learning summer school, so they're going to be able to continue their learning online. You're required to enroll in distance learning academic workshop, where there'll be a facilitator of somebody to check in with the student regularly throughout the summer. That individual will may have to dip into grading various types of work from different classes, but we are investing in a team of teachers this summer to facilitate an academic workshop class in the summer school to get around, so that not every single one of our teacher has capacity. They have children, there's different things going on. So we wanted to afford our kids the opportunity to have the extra time, but really be strategic about how we're going to get that feedback to them. So that hopefully that is helpful. Joe, would you add anything to that?
No, that was great.
New Canaan, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I mean, we don't have credit recovery in kindergarten through 8th grade, so it's not really an issue. We're moving everybody forward. We know that there's always going to be pieces of the story that we don't know for any one family or any one student. So with that in mind, you know, we're actually in meetings right now trying to think about what fall will look like as we move forward. And again, that's the prioritization of the content so that we know at least what's covered and what we might need to review or reinforce in the coming year. But I do think the benefit of some of this, at least K-8, is that instead of content, that we're focused a little bit more on some of what we want kids to understand and how we want them to do. So it's more process oriented. So we'll go for that rather than just drowning them in more content. So.
Thanks. I have another one I think that it would be for everyone. Are there any enrichment opportunities provided for students during this distance learning time?
I have seen some teachers offering enrichment within their classes, which is nice. So if they're giving a flex day on their own, so say on a Friday, a teacher might have an internal flex day that's separate from the building level one. They will provide students with some support activities if they need extra help with what they're doing in class, but then extension activities for students who already have met the standards for the week. So that's been a nice way that I've seen on the classroom level of that happening.
And I would, I've actually been in development this past week. One of the things we're going to try to do at the elementary level is offer things like, I don't know, lunch with a historical figure, or we are receiving feedback from families that some of their kids just want more. You know, they have these commercial programs that you're seeing, come and learn about this and learn about that. We have staff with capacity to do a lot of these things. So we have that flexible schedule that affords us an opportunity to do like a dine and discuss session for lunch, or we could do an extra, one of the things that I think note-taking and strategic thinking and organizing your thoughts is something that people have been asking for. So we're going to try to put in like a little mini schedule that we can kind of tweet out a banner ad of like, here's an offering for this week. We'll see how it goes. I'll keep you posted. You may or may not see me in a Puritan outfit online eating lunch with some kids. We'll see how it goes. You know, it may be a total flop, but I think we've been asked for more. We also are going to be offering summer school enrichment. I think there's also that idea that summer school is like, well, you have to recover your credit, but there are families and there are kids who have felt like they haven't had that level of engagement. They want to be prepared. So we're going to afford kids the opportunity to take some classes this summer, maybe like a modern world history refresher course, or argumentation refresher course, or even get to know a new topic at more American Revolution in depth or something like that. So we want to make sure it's not just for recovery, but for people who want to kind of push themselves and stay more current.
Yeah, I didn't mention field trips when for New Canaan, and we created a document that had all sorts of options. And one thing I didn't say is that our elementary has an early release day on Wednesdays, and our middle and high school has an early release day on Thursdays. And those days are used for professional learning and planning, but then for students, sometimes those field trips. So we've sort of gone through the curriculum and identified some real like power opportunity field trips that would really enhance what they do. But our middle school is actually running after school programs. So think about what you might do for a gardening club. I mean, there's actually clubs happening. Guidance counselors are doing their lunch bunches and things like that, but teachers are getting creative with different kind of lunches. I haven't seen any historical figures show up. Maybe we'll have to see if Jen can we could do inter-district Zooms. I mean, there's really some creative possibilities that might be a lot of fun here. Yeah. But yeah, I think that it's allowed some creativity to happen that couldn't happen other times. So I think some of that creativity, hopefully that stays.
I just wanted to add, don't forget that you can also just put in choice into your daily practice. And I think that's the part of enrichment as well.
Yeah, as Mary said, you know, we have after school clubs that would kind of be functioning regularly that are running in Canton as well. you know, it's not always academic, but I have lunch with kids I would normally eat lunch with once a week. And sometimes I do like Friday trivia if you're done with all your work. Just, I think, Jen, you put it really well. Just like families and kids want to see us more and they want to engage with us more and just like know that we're still there in a live atmosphere. So, you know, whether we're talking about something not social studies related or we're throwing out, you know, facts about DC trivia, I think that those are good options for kids to keep them engaged.
I think also, Nora, your comment too about learning is fun has been a kind of mentality change that I know we've all been trying to work hard with our teachers to make sure that everyone understands that regular learning can be really fun. It can be fun to be engaged in historical discourse and all of that. So wanted to mention that as well.
Thank you, Mary. And you just made me think of another thought. You know, I'm having as both a parent, I have a elementary, middle, and high schooler. We really can't create school online. Like we're trying to sort of fit, we have to look at the opportunity here to build something maybe new that is very daunting and very overwhelming. But I love our team has had so many flexible thinkers that were like, well, it's almost like that game where you kind of just keep adding on and adding on to new layers. If you've ever watched those improv shows where they're saying yes and they're saying, well, yeah, but we could also do this, and that's where the innovation can come out. And it may be a really, you know, as hard as these times are for us, that silver lining of looking at ways to find the positives is important.
Okay, I think we're pretty much up to our time, but I do want to thank the presenters on behalf of the Commissioner of Education and the Connecticut State Department of Education. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your best practices, your resources, your lessons learned. This is uncharted territory, as you've mentioned, and I think it's important to really, you know, to look at, like you said, Jennifer, the silver linings, the lessons learned, and how, if this happens to, you know, be extended at any time, what we've learned, what we can learn from each other, how we can make things a little bit maybe better or different to work for our families and our students. So I want to thank everyone for attending. I hope you all have a great rest of the day and a rest of this week. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.